Welcome to another episode of Leadership Lessons. My guest today is Dawn Reed, and we're going to talk about some of the struggles and many of the joys being married to a pastor. Dawn, thank you for taking the time to join Leadership Lessons.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So let me tell you about Dawn. Dawn Reed is Kentucky born and raised. She has been married to her high school sweetheart, Tommy Reed, for over 42 years, is the mother of two grown children. Dawn's worked as a dental assistant for 16 years and is also a newspaper columnist. Her passions include teaching, reading, and jail ministry. She serves at Fitzpatrick Baptist Church in Prestonburg, where Tommy is the pastor. And Dawn, you and Tommy are just a blessing to all kinds of people, but you're a blessing to me personally. We just love y'all and thank the Lord for you.
We love you, Brother Todd.
So I want to set things in context, Dawn. If folks have never visited Fitzpatrick Baptist Church, they'd have no idea what they were going to. So everything in East Kentucky is a hill and a holler, and there's mouth of a holler and the head of a holler, and so if you drive back, is it Abbott Creek Road?
Big Branch of Abbott.
Big Branch of Abbott. So drive back that road, and you'll see some houses on the left that look like they fit right in the area, and you get a little further back, and you're like, man, there's a lot of houses back here, and these are really nice homes. And then you drive further back, and there's a Muslim mosque on the right side of the road. This is far east Kentucky in Appalachia. And then you drive further, and there's this big, beautiful church building, Fitzpatrick Baptist Church, probably seats 300 people, an education space, and just a beautiful facility. And that's where you all minister. You live back there, and you minister in that church building, but your ministry goes all over the community. If you go out and eat lunch with Tommy, Tommy knows everybody. Everybody knows him. When I'm in the church, excuse me, you're running around and folks love you and are grateful for your ministry. So that's the context of your work. Tell us how you came to receive Jesus and then how you ended up being a pastor's wife.
I gave my heart to Jesus when I was 8.5. That was in 1971. My family had moved from Pikeville, and the very day that we moved, we pulled into the driveway at Jerry Bottom of Huddy, Kentucky. And as soon as we pulled in the driveway, Bob Norman, the new pastor at First Baptist Church of Belfry, he was out making visits, and he was in his early 20s, just a young man. He walked into the yard and he asked my mom if he could talk to my sister and me about Jesus. And so we walked into our house and sat on a brown couch, and both of us accepted Jesus that day.
My
and that
goodness.
was over 50 years ago. But I will be eternally grateful. I am eternally grateful for Brother Bob that day, a young man, new church, out making visits. And so we grew up in church. My sister and I did. I taught Sunday school and Bible school. And as when Tommy Reed and I got married, he served as a deacon. I never dreamed in this world that he would be a pastor and I would be a pastor's wife. We had never been to seminary. He had been to college, but we had fallen in love in high school and lived on love a lot of the years. But when we finally started feeling the Lord, surrendered to the Lord's call, it was because of the mission trip that we had taken to the faraway land of Lorain, Ohio. Steve Rice was our pastor, and we had served in different ways and were faithful. But just on that mission trip is when my husband felt the Lord calling him to something. He didn't know what it was. And so finally, after a few years, one Sunday night we surrendered. We didn't know what that meant, but we were doing it. We didn't know if we would go to Africa or wherever, but we surrendered on a Sunday night to just serve the Lord fully in full-time ministry, whatever that meant.
Yeah.
And we were a mess. We didn't have any education. We were broke, and we had two kids, but we gave it all to the Lord, and he took it. And he has, just like in the Bible stories, he uses ordinary people. And so we're so thankful that he did that. Tommy filled in at McVeigh. We didn't go to Africa. We went 10 miles up the road And it was a church, McVeigh Baptist Church. There was only a handful of people there. They were about to close because the attendance had gone down so much. And he had studied and spoke for 15 minutes. And I knew that day that God was going to do something big, because that was just not what we expected.
Yeah.
But they called him as the pastor there, and it's just that was over 25 years ago. So,
and Dawn, you and Tommy just minister side by side each other. You have your separate and unique ministry, but you're doing it together. Our current KBC president, James Carroll, cites you and Tommy as two people instrumental in his own personal walk with the Lord. So you guys have always been investing in people. What's the journey of being a minister's wife? What's that been like for you to take on that role? It wasn't what you married into, but it's what happened in your marriage. You embraced it. But what's it been like to kind of grow into that role?
As I said, I didn't ever expect it, and so I didn't have any training. There weren't books or anything. And the places that I have been have allowed me to be who I am, and that's one of the biggest blessings. Where we were at McVeigh, they had not had a pastor's wife in 36 years. So there was no set, she had passed away.
Yeah.
And so there was no set role for what I needed to be. And their son, that pastor's son, warned me when we came there. He said, they don't know what a pastor's wife is supposed to do, so you give them some grace. But because the attendance was so low, we all grew and learned together.
Yeah.
And we stayed there 5.5 years. And then when we came here, they just let me be who I was. And what I mean by that is every pastor's wife is different. They have different passions, different gifts. And when you let a pastor's wife find where she's supposed to serve, that is such a wonderful, gracious thing. They can literally bloom where they're planted. And when you think about it, it's not really fair to compare pastors' wives to pastors' wives. But Fitzpatrick, for almost 20 years, next month it will be 20 years, they have just, and you mentioned in my bio that I love jail ministry, and before that it was prison ministry, and they've gotten behind me, whatever I have asked, and it's just been a great thing. But I also know that everybody doesn't have that experience.
That's right.
Some pastors' wives have hard things.
So Dawn, I want to share an opinion here. I think that being a pastor's wife can be one of the most challenging jobs roles in a church. If you're a pastor and there's something going on that needs attention, you can address it in lots of ways. You can do it through various deacons meetings, committee meetings, even preach messages that can help shape the challenges. But a pastor's wife doesn't really have that platform and lives with a concern about impacting her husband's ministry, and so your role is more challenging. What can this? So we sent you some questions, but this is not one of those questions. But I think it's an important one. What can a pastor do to help his wife have what you have at Fitzpatrick? In other words, for his wife to have the freedom she needs to be herself and not expected to play the piano, lead the women's ministry necessarily, unless that's your gift mix. What can a pastor do to help his wife in that way, do you think?
I would think to verbalize that for maybe when the pastor is coming, when the pastor is interviewing, to just for him to say that she needs to find where she is to serve, and then communicate that to the church, because so many people years ago thought a pastor's wife played the piano or sang or did both. And I am a fourth string, maybe fifth string on a snowy day pianist. So it's just, I think if he communicated that, because as the pastor goes, a lot of times the church will go. Right. And so if he gently reminds them that she, like any new church member, needs to find their way and where they're supposed to serve.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. So, Dawn, you're one of those positive and upbeat people I know. I love being around you and Tommy together, and just grateful for your life. And you're going to lean toward, if I'm asking you about challenges of being a pastor's wife, you're probably going to lean toward the positive aspects of it, which are there, and we're going to talk about those. But there are some challenges to the role. So can you list kind of some of those for us? Maybe we talk a little bit about some of the challenges of being a pastor's wife.
I think that is a good thing to talk about because, as I mentioned, Fitzpatrick is a beautiful, wonderful place to be. But I know pastors' wives that have had hard times, and I'm glad you asked that. So I actually did write down 5 things.
Okay.
One of the first things I thought about is when you are new at a church, and we just talked about that. It's strange. You're not sure where you fit in. You want to jump in, but you don't know if there's a place. And there's a time where you're trying to figure out where you belong. The first year in Bible school here, I hid in the pastor's study and tried not to cry because I had loved Bible school, but they were going on with it because they'd always done Bible school too. But trying to figure out where you're supposed to be, that's kind of a fresh first thing.
Yeah, and you don't want to step on someone else's role. I mean, you're coming into a new place and you don't want to take something that someone else is doing. That makes perfect sense.
And then for so long it's somewhere else. You have served and it's been your passion and you've loved it and you're invested, but then you're going to have a new chapter at the new church. So that was a thing that I had tried, that I went through. As I said, I hid in the pastor's study during Bible school. I don't know if they counted me that year or not. Another thing I thought of is how it affects you when your people are hurting. And I wish, like, my husband talks to a lot of people and I do not know what they say. He never tells me stuff, but sometimes I do know the things that people go through, and I just wish that I could fix their problems for them, because you just see what they're going through and you just wish. Last year we had many deaths in our church and our area, and each one, and then there was the shooting, then there was the flooding, and so just so much heartache. I wish that I could fix people's problems, and I wish I could make people seek the Lord.
Yeah.
Force them to read God's word.
Sure.
That sounded really sweet, didn't it? But when you see someone, it's almost connected to that other one. When you see someone not seeking the Lord's will, and you know what's ahead of them if they don't turn to Him, that is a spiritual ache for them. I'm going to mention COVID.
Yeah.
This was number 4. It was probably one of the greatest challenges. It was horrifying, and it changed the dynamic of all churches, all worship, every ministry. Overnight, old and young pastors had to become techies.
Yeah.
And it was so easy for the young people, but it was difficult for us not so young people if you wanted to stay connected. And then after COVID, it hurt so much because so many people decided they didn't want to come back. And that was that hurt my heart, because I know that hurt my husband's heart. And then the last one is spiritual warfare. As a pastor's wife, there is a huge target on my family and my husband. And the devil doesn't want any good thing to be going on in a church, unity or anything, or for people to be saved. Yeah. And so through the spiritual warfare to pursue with the Lord and just keep praying and just keep reading God's word.
Dawn, those are incredible answers on some of the challenges, and I think folks who are not in your position wouldn't understand those, but every pastor's wife certainly understands the things that you mentioned. That spiritual warfare part, sometimes when Christians hear that language, they just don't even know what to do with it. But it seems like spiritual warfare shows up in some pretty practical ways. How has spiritual warfare impacted, without sharing anything you don't want to share, what are some ways that you all kind of had to battle that? Is it just things that people have said, or seasons of discouragement? I mean, that's been part of my story, is just long seasons of discouragement. Things may be going on okay on the outside, but on the inside, there's just a real battle going on. Anything else you'd want to add about spiritual warfare?
Anytime you try to do any good thing and any God-based thing, any special service, any special Bible study, that's just the way the devil does. He unleashes. Usually, it can often be circumstances, and then someone will offhand say something hurtful. It can be everything from appliances at home, cars going down, but so often it can be discouragement. The devil can make you overthink things, and so if we're paying attention, and it is real, and to think that it's not there, especially because it's the pastor's family, he will work through problems with kids, especially Sunday mornings, you know that, and anything. He will use any tool, any person, anything, just to distract and discourage and steal hope. And I don't want to say again about COVID, but it was such a line in the sand. After COVID, it was such a discouraging time because I know pastors and pastors' wives took it personally when people didn't come back, or they just didn't care anymore. And then you go through, am I supposed to be here? What have we done wrong? What could we have done better? It's that overthinking kind of thing.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And these are folks that you've loved and invested in, and for them to just like give completely up on church attendance, it's like you're kidding me. We had a relationship, and it's hard not to take it personally. All right, so you shared about the challenges. Thank you for doing that. What's the other side? Some of the joys that you get to experience being married to a pastor, especially in a church like Fitzpatrick?
Well, I love Fitzpatrick because they are full of broken people that have been forgiven, had new starts, and so they are very welcoming. And one of my favorite things is we've been having God's been really working in our middle schoolers, and at the end of almost every service lately, my husband has been over on the side praying with a family, and we've got kids on their knees and he's on their knees, and eternities are changed. He is that brother Bob that is helping someone find the Lord, and their futures are changed. I love when people make recommitments to the Lord, and just they get fired up. And I love seeing how people serve. And my prayer is often for the Lord to raise up preachers, teachers, and missionaries from Fitzpatrick and our whole area. And so seeing people serve the Lord and use their gifts, and just and it's all about the kingdom. It just is. And so I just love seeing eternities changed and people's lives changed, because when they have been away from the Lord, it's almost a shriveled up, dried up thing. And then when they come back to the Lord, it's just a new life, just a restart.
The challenges that you experience are connected to people, and the joys that you experience are connected to people. True. And Dawn, it's no doubt that you love people. One of my favorite stories was preaching revival over at y'all's church, and stayed in a local hotel and met a young lady from the custodial staff and started talking to her, and gave her, I think you gave me some banana nut bread, and I gave it to her because she said she liked it, and then you actually got her name and followed up with her to try to have a gospel conversation. So just thank you for your love for people, and you and Tommy share that in common. So Dawn, you had to grow into this role. You've been at it now for a good number of years, 20 years at Fitzpatrick, and you mentioned other churches as well. What could a pastor's wife do to grow into her role, and what's been helpful to you?
It is, as I mentioned, it's hard when you go to a new place because you're trying to find where you are to serve. And even though it sounds simplistic, just praying and seeing what is available or not available. I know when jail and prison ministry came up, it was not on my radar, not in any way, for even a second, but it turned out to be something really awesome. And so I'm thinking just keep an open mind and pray and serve where you like, but especially don't serve just because there's an opening. I think that's what a lot of pastors' wives have done. And I have been in a lot of positions over the years that I was not called to do. And so it was a real struggle, and it was hard, and I couldn't wait to get out of it. But the Lord, when we pray about it and talk to others in your church and ask them, the Lord will completely show you what it is. And then he'll give you the reassurance over and over again.
Dawn, if any young pastor's wife called you for advice and assistance, you'd drop whatever you were doing and listen to them, pray with them, and talk to them. But sometimes, we've not those who are willing to do that haven't had mentors in their own life. Were there ever other pastors' wives that you could talk to, or that have been helpful to you, or have you been on the other side of it more, of trying to listen to pastors' wives and give advice as requested?
When I was younger, Steve Ross's wife, Laura, was my best friend, and I learned so many good things from her. Our kids were the same age. The Lord brought us together at just perfect time. Then we got to serve on missions together, and so she was awesome. But after I became a pastor's wife, the pastor's wives were never connected, and you never saw anybody or talked to anybody. Now that I'm older, I'm all about contacting younger pastors' wives and encouraging them, because I don't want them to think they're in it all alone. Of course, everybody knows they've got God,
right,
but I don't want them to think that they don't have anybody that is not cheering them on, encouraging them. One of the things that's been so helpful as a pastor's wife in Kentucky is Peggy Berry years ago started connecting us, and she got the pastor's wife's retreat planned, and then Sarah Robinson is carrying that on. And knowing that you're connected, one of the things Sarah did at the last retreat was she got us in regions. So we met people, our sisters in ministry, that we had never even met, and so that's carrying on. I think the connection between, and looking for the connection too, is the thing. Not to sit and say, I don't have anybody, but to search it out.
Dawn, one of the painful aspects of ministry leadership can be hearing criticism. And I would think in a pastor's wife role, either hearing criticism about yourself, secondhand probably, or hearing it about your husband who's the pastor. How have you handled criticism when it's come to you, or about your husband or your family or anything like that? Have you dealt with that?
Well, for me, I have to make sure where the criticism is coming from. Is it true or not? Because I'm far from perfect, and I mess up quite a lot. So I need to find out if that's true, and if it is true, if it was deserved, then I need to pray and then find out how to make it right. Sometimes criticism is not true. It is just a misunderstanding that someone doesn't want to get over. And so with that too, to pray, to not let it get in your head. There was a time many years ago where somebody was mad at me for 5 years.
Wow.
And so the thing is, I hadn't done anything wrong. The right thing was just not what was the desired decision. But anyway, when somebody criticizes you, the main thing is praying that the Lord will help you not let it get in your head. Yeah. Because even if people are critical, you still have to keep going. You still have to carry on. You can't avoid people. You can't hide. Or if you do hide, you can only do it for a short time. But just prayer. And I feel like so often there's a reason the helmet of salvation is mentioned, so that you can keep the devil out of your head. Because women overthink stuff. I don't know if you know that, but we tend to overthink stuff.
I'm not sure that's limited to gender. I think plenty of us men overthink things as well. I know I can be guilty. So, Dawn, you mentioned having friends at church, and how do you find trustworthy friends? And I'm trying to be careful here. You love everybody at the church, but everyone's not a confidant for you. So how do you find those one or two individuals who can be that trustworthy friend that you can share a lot, even if you don't share everything? How do you find that person in your church?
I would say that you have to tread lightly or wade in slowly, because you have to be careful not to overshare.
Yeah.
You have to guard your privacy and yet still be open. And we've learned that the hard way. And I'm not saying even as Tommy, as the pastor, but we learned that growing up, that things were talked to death. But you just have to guard your family and your husband. And you can tread lightly and get to know people, and then you will know who you can share with. But just to be careful. And that sounds not fair, because you want to have good friends.
Sure.
You could contact another pastor's wife, but I would just say go slowly and be carefully.
Yeah, I think that's
careful with.
I think that's good wisdom. So, Dawn, as a minister's wife, you're not only working through your own challenges and struggles and walk with the Lord, spiritual warfare, but sometimes you're helping your husband with his own discouragement and challenges. So how can ministry wives practically encourage their husbands, especially during those seasons when ministry is difficult?
I'm so glad you gave this to me in advance, because this is, I think, crucial. As I said, after COVID was a really hard time. The main thing that I would say is pray for your pastor husband, silently and out loud. My husband knows the Bible and preaches the Bible, but I still send him Bible verses occasionally. One thing too is to be there. We grew up through, and I mean as an adult, we grew up in hard times, and so I always want to be there when I can. I want to be the one face of support that my husband can always count on. That's from the growing up in hard times. Another one is bite your tongue when your husband is discouraged. Don't say everything you're thinking, because he doesn't need to hear all that. And then the most important one is to remember that you are partnered together, because the devil will use that discouragement, that difficulty to make you think that problems you have are too great. We have to just remind ourselves that we're on the same team, we're working together, and we're not perfect, but we're perfect for each other. And I think that's one of the ways that the spiritual warfare works in pastor's family, is one little problem can seem so big, but we have to remember that we are partnered together.
Dawn, Connie and I have been married for coming up on 31 years. I've been in ministry for 32. And there have been plenty of times when I've come to her, we're partners in ministry like you've described, and our life is good, we're happy where we are, and maybe there's some challenges, and I'll say, Connie, I'm not sure how this is going to work out, and we're in a good place right now, but who knows where we'll be next. Every single time she's been able to say, the Lord's always taking care of us, the Lord will take care of us if something comes up as well. That has settled my heart as a husband who wants to be a good father to our children, a good husband to my wife, and knowing that when I'm challenged, that Connie's able to be a good partner as well. Thank you so much for what you shared. Any resources that have been helpful to you in your walk with the Lord or in your particular role, being married to a pastor?
There are 2 books that have really, really been a blessing to me. One was sent from the North American Mission Board, and I really appreciate it. It's How to Thrive as a Pastor's Wife by Christine Hoover. For many years, I looked for a book about being a pastor's wife, like Pastor's Wife for Dummies or something like that, and couldn't find anything. And this, it's invaluable, and especially for a new pastor's wife, it hits so many good things. And another, I have been saved since 1971, and I've read my Bible a lot, but Replicate by Robbie Gallaty changed the way I read my Bible. Peggy Berry is the one that recommended that. Oh my goodness, it made it just so much more personal, and it was a game changer. So those are 2 I would definitely recommend.
And you mentioned Sarah Robinson. Sarah's available to help ministry wives, and things are done throughout the year. KBC has services available and peer-to-peer work and connecting wives together. Dawn, you've been involved in Christian ministry leadership for a long, long time, working alongside your husband, with him, and in other ministries. What's something that you've seen in leadership, maybe modeled, maybe you've seen in your husband or someone else, that really means a lot to you that you'd like to see maybe in more leaders? Something you've seen a leader do that you think is important and helpful?
Since after COVID shut down every ministry, everything, and I think it was a great time to reevaluate what was important and what was not important. And this was a personal thing. The jail ministry, we were just making things really hard, and then to take a time to think about what's important and what's not. And after COVID, we realized that it really is all about God and it's kingdom building. And sometimes we make it hard, sometimes we make it busy, but I think that is just one of the things that I learned personally, making it about the kingdom. I do love my Tommy Reed. He has such a heart for people. I love how he gets out in the community. And I think that's one of the things that I've seen from him. I know him better than anybody, but he loves people, and people are outside of the church. So that's really where you have to go to reach the lost at Food City, in town, just wherever you live, there's people that are lost. And if you start having conversations, just regular conversations, it can eventually get to the spiritual conversations.
That's exactly right. Dawn, thank you so much for your ministry in your home, your ministry alongside your pastor husband, Tommy, your ministry at Fitzpatrick, and then beyond in the jail and the workplace. Thank you for joining Leadership Lessons.
Thank you. It has been my privilege. I appreciate your time. And pastors' wives, hang in there. Don't quit.
Amen. Thank you.